Hi guys, Troop Squire here, and today I'm going to look at the 2017 refresh of the HP OMEN 15. I lack some of the tools to do a fully comprehensive review, but I'll cover as much as I can and we'll show some gaming benchmarks at the end. So let's kick things off with the specs. In this model we have one of the new Kaby Lake i5-7300U processors, 8GB of DDR4 RAM clocked at 2133 MHz, a matte 1080p 60Hz IPS screen, the new Pascal line NVIDIA GTX 1050 with a 128GB M.2 SSD and a 1TB 7200 RPM secondary drive. This model is essentially the same as the 2016 HP OMEN 15 in terms of design, the keyboard and the speakers, and it also weighs a very impressive 2.2 kilograms, which makes it one of the lighter 15-inch gaming laptops. The chassis is last year's faux carbon fibre mesh design, which, whilst looking good, is the biggest fingerprint magnet I've ever come across on a laptop. To stop this laptop from looking mucky as hell, you're going to need to clean it fairly regularly. Under the hood you have dual Bang & Olufsen, which is how I think you pronounce it, speakers, a full-size red backlit chiclet type keyboard with numeric keypad, and a surprisingly decent touchpad with multi-touch support. For ports, on the left you have a Kensington lock, USB 2, USB 3, and the audio jack. On the right you have an SD card reader, USB 3, HDMI, RJ45 LAN, and the power jack. So in terms of my thoughts of the laptop, let's start with the good. Firstly, I like the look of the laptop, and it certainly stands out. It's quite a sturdy build with very little flex, the keyboard feels great to type on, and I like the glowing red backlight. The trackpad, which is usually my biggest gripe with laptops, is decent and accurate. There's a good amount of storage thanks to the 1TB backup drive, and the M.2 gives a good startup speed and loads apps very quickly. For the backup, it's good to see they've included a 7200 RPM hard drive instead of cheaping out with a 5400 instead. The battery life is also very impressive. On my GL502 I was lucky to get 2 hours out of it just doing basic tasks. The OMEN lasted around 4.5 before it first tapped out, and nearly 6 hours of watching videos, which is great if you're going on long trips. Although under high load it will get you about an hour and a half to 2 hours. The GTX 1050, which is not capable of maxing out most modern games, is still quite a capable mid-range card. Playing older and or well-optimised games like Sniper Elite 3 and Rocket League, you'll easily be able to max them out and play with frame rates well over 60. Newer games, however, will certainly struggle, but I'll talk about that in the benchmarks. Fan noise is another plus. I left Rise of the Tomb Raider running on ultra settings for about 20 minutes and the fan noise was at about 40 to 45 decibels. This is fairly quiet by gaming laptop standards, and you can't hear the fans over the speakers unless you're playing a fairly quiet game. Now onto the bad. Firstly, the screen is one of the worst IPS screens I've ever seen, especially in terms of colours. This was immediately apparent when I turned on the laptop and saw the very washed out looking red HP logo in the background. I downloaded the same image on my phone and PC monitor, which is a tweaked TN panel, and the difference was night and day. The brightness is also quite low. When I was at my office I tried watching a film and struggled to see what was going on in some of the darker lit scenes. What you're watching now was in a darker lit room, so it looks a bit better. It's certainly functional, but pales in comparison to some of HP's rivals like Asus and MSI. The speakers, whilst decently loud, lack any kind of bass and don't have the best sound quality. In terms of how loud they are, watching the Logan trailer it was reading at about 80 decibels. My biggest gripe, and one that's a real deal breaker for me, is that whilst the laptop doesn't get particularly hot underneath or on the surface, whilst even under high load, the area where I naturally rest my right wrist gets quite warm, even when just doing daily tasks. This makes the laptop quite uncomfortable to use, and I found my wrist getting sweaty after very little use. It's a shame as I very much like this laptop, but I bought this with the intention of using it for work as well as games, so the heat issue is not really acceptable. Anyway, onto some benchmarks. First up is the aforementioned Sniper Elite 3. This game is very well optimised, so it's no surprise that on ultra settings the game sits at around 80 to 100 FPS for the most part. This really does show that for older, less demanding and or well optimised games, the 1050 is perfectly sufficient for 1080p. Moving on to The Witcher 3, this is where the card really started to struggle. On the highest preset I was getting about 20 to 25 FPS, however, even when I lowered this to high and even medium, the game never gets close to 60 and generally sat between 40 to 50, which is still very playable. Next up is Rise of the Tomb Raider. As with Witcher 3, this game is stunning to look at, but all that visual splendour comes at a cost in terms of frame rate. On the highest preset I was getting around 30 FPS with dips into the 20s. Turning this down to medium and high gave the FPS a boost, but it still would sit around the 40 mark with dips into the 30s and even lower during intense scenes. If you're playing with a controller then this is certainly playable, however with a mouse and keyboard it is a bit laggy. Lastly, Resident Evil 7 has just been released and thankfully it seems to be well optimised. Admittedly, if you max the game out completely then I was actually getting around 10 FPS, but after lowering a few settings it was perfectly playable at 40 to 50, with a few drops here and there. If you don't mind reducing a few settings to medium-ish, then you'll easily maintain a steady 60. So in conclusion, the GTX 1050 is a good mid-range card and is a decent boost over a 960M. However, if you want to have all the settings turned up and 60 FPS 1080p, you'd better be looking at probably a 1050 Ti or more realistically a 1060 based laptop. As for the laptop itself, I paid £850 for this model, which is exceptionally good value for the specs. There are just a few points to stop it from being a must-buy for me, which is really the surface heat issue and the poor screen. And that's it from me. If you like this review, please let me know with a like and subscribe, or a dislike if you thought it was rubbish. Thanks for watching and hopefully see you on the next one.